Okay, okay. So you're saying that you think Benedict Arnold is like this upstanding guy. Like,
I'm saying that he was pushed too far. He was an upstanding guy, and it's like road rage.
it's like road rage? Is
What
that what they said about Judas Iscariot? As Jesus was hanging on the cross? Well, yeah,
I
it's a lot like road rage.
Judas. He
This guy goes along the coastline just burning down houses, killing people.
Well, I didn't say that
Road rage?
I didn't say he could walk on water or that he did. I'm just saying that the man
Wow.
was pushed too far, and I
Yeah,
I think we
well,
have to kind of
in my
reevaluate.
book, he's a traitor.
Oh, I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying that he did some bad things, but I think we kind of need to look at some of the things done to him that.
So in your book, it's different. In my book, it's different. I think we need to talk to somebody who's actually written a book on the subject. What do you think about that?
Great idea. You have
Let's
anyone in
do it.
mind?
Yeah, let's go find someone. We will seek them out, even if they're not in America, even if they're not in England.
I know who's the perfect person is Dr. Stephen Brumwell.
Oh yeah, I remember you mentioning him a couple of weeks ago that he'd be on the show today. Let's get started. All right, what's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Sons of History podcast. I'm Dustin Bass, and right next to me is a not fellow traitor, because I'm not a traitor to the American cause. That would be you.
I'm not a traitor. I'm just saying if you want to stop evil or people doing evil things, you have to understand why they did it. It doesn't condone. It just means you know why it happened and you can prevent such.
That is the Gospel of Alan Joachim.
Hey, like
Yeah,
you
it's right up
push.
there with the Book of Judas. I can't wait to get to reading it. All right, before we get into it, because we've got a very awesome guest, Stephen Brumwell. This is going to be a great conversation. All of you American Revolution fans out there, turn fans as well, people who love
Yeah.
the show, you're going to enjoy this conversation. Before we get started into what happened in history way back then, let's have a discussion on what happened this week in history.
All right, Dustin, I went first last week. I do believe you have the honors, Your Honor.
I think it's perfect that I would start it because mine has a lot to do with the Revolutionary War and right after. So, this week in history, This Week in History is actually the first time I've ever done this. 2 specific days in This Week in History. One is March 1st, 1781, and the other one is March 4th, 1789. Correlation, very interesting. March 1st, March 1st, 1781, the Articles of Confederation are ratified. These remained in effect throughout the war. And they ended in 1789. You know, the Articles of Confederation, they just weren't going to work. And if you really want to understand why they didn't work, I would read the Federalist Papers. That's a good source, and they sort of break down why the Articles of Confederation just didn't work as far as the law of the land. March 4th, 1789, what happens? The first new Congress meets in New York City under the Constitution that we have now. And here we are, almost 250 years later. We still got that son of a gun. Thank God, especially with all that's going on here lately. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Thank you, Founding Fathers, for thinking centuries ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Canada, what's going on in Canada,
Yeah. Australia.
Yeah, good thing we had duck hunting back in those days, because, yeah,
Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have guns. All
We
right.
shouldn't have the First Amendment because, hate speech shouldn't be protected, and we know the Second Amendment was about duck hunting. So, yeah, don't get me started on that one. So,
Too late. Already
yeah,
did.
I know.
Go ahead.
Did you say 1789 it started or 1781?
Which ones?
Well, it began in 1781, correct?
Articles of Confederation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I thought it was started like in when they did the Declaration of Independence in 76.
No, it didn't get ratified. It took a long time to get ratified.
Okay. Shays Rebellion, man. That's what they were like, all right, we can't do this. All right. Mine, let's move forward. And mine's also going to be a series of dates, March 2nd to March the 6th of 1836. let's move to Texas. Okay, now, at the time, the Alamo was under siege. Santa Anna still had his about 4,000 soldiers, I think it was 4,000, surrounding the Alamo, the estimate. And it was a lot more than the 180 plus that were housed inside the Alamo. So, so the Alamo was on its ninth day of the siege. They did have it was February 29th, because it was a leap year, so that's why the discrepancy. But because it was a 13-day siege. But while the Alamo was going on, delegates met at Washington on the Brazos, Texas delegates, that is, and they decided on March the 2nd to declare their independence because, there were grievances just like in Philadelphia, but this time there were grievances against Santa Anna, who decided, I'm going to be a dictator, and he scrapped the 1824 Constitution. And there were revolutions and rebellions and wars of secession all over Mexico. We in Texas just happened to fight and win.
Yeah.
So Santa Anna was going to different places, Zacatecas, and just beating everybody to death. But he comes to Texas, now and lost. Now, on March the 6th was when the Alamo fell. But between that time, they met. They used Thomas Jefferson's template to declare independence, and we became the Republic of Texas. They also used the template for the Constitution and the Declaration. We called it the Declaration of Rights. They had the Bill of Rights. Now, they appointed David G. Burnett as president, and Lorenzo di Zavala was the vice president. So, it was, we had, the Tejanos was there were about 4,000 Tejanos in Texas and about 30,000 Texians, European Americans, Anglo-Americans. So the representation, there were about 3 or 4 Tejanos who signed the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence, rather, in Texas.
Very interesting. So, March 2nd?
March 2nd was when Texas declared its independence.
You know when Sam Houston was born?
No, I sure don't. I know when he died. Was it March 2nd? Okay, I know.
He was born. He was born for the Texas Revolution.
Was he? Okay. Well, I know that he died in 1863.
No? Really? It's a joke. Anyways, all right, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's have Denton Florian.
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
Old Dave Chappelle show.
Let's wrap it up. Florian to do,
Let's get the wrap it up box.
All right. So.
Yeah, wrap that gavel up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is This Week in History.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is a long time coming. We have Dr. Stephen Brumwell as our guest. He is an award-winning writer and historian specializing in 18th century British-American military affairs. Now, he has written several books, including Paths of Glory, which is about the life and death of General James Wolfe. That's the guy that captured Quebec. Let's see, White Devil, which is the next book I'm going to read. It's a true story of war, savagery, and vengeance in colonial America. It's about Robert Rogers. Redcoats, the British soldier, and war in the Americas from 55 to 63. Paths of Glory. Did I already do that one? I already did that one.
How many times did he write that?
Well, no. You know what? I did. This is. Did you know that and you didn't? You. All right, you little. Oh, I must said I forgot we're a family show. Now, the James Wolfe book, which I didn't realize I said it twice, was it won the Charles P. Stacey Prize for Canadian Military History and the Distinguished Book Award of the Society of Colonial Wars of New York. He wrote a book on George Washington called Gentleman Warrior, which won both the 2013 George Washington Book Prize and the biography/autobiography category at the 2013 New England Book Festival. Now, his latest book, Turncoat, Benedict Arnold and the Crisis of American Liberty, won the 2020 Distinguished Book Award from the Society of Military History and has been praised by Mark Edward Lender, who wrote Fatal Sunday. We
co-wrote.
Yeah, co-wrote. Gordon Wood, who's like one of my favorite authors. Edward Lengel and Francis Cogliano. He earned his Ph.D. in history from the University of Leeds and currently lives in Amsterdam with his wife Laura and their 2 children, a son and a daughter.
Beautiful.
All righty. Stephen, welcome. It's great to have you. How are you doing today?
Great, thanks, guys. How are you two?
We are good.
We're good. We're good.
We're living the high life.
You know what? I was going to say Guten Tag, but you're not in Germany. You're in the Netherlands. And I don't think that's a good, wise thing to say, especially with what happened about 70, 80 years ago.
No, they still have grudges, and if a German walks into a bar, it's not unusual for someone to say, "Oh, can I have my bike back?"
Oh, yeah. Ooh. Oh, that's a good way to
hello.
start a story. A German walks into a bar,
Yeah.
bartender says,
Yeah.
give me my.
Yeah, and it wouldn't really qualify as a joke.
No.
Qualify as
They'll say it's too soon.
a moral
Yeah.
tell. All right. Well, hey, we're really looking forward to this conversation. Alan and I have discussed Benedict Arnold numerous times. We did a rundown of the Revolutionary War, and so we've had our discussions about Benedict Arnold. And I know Alan's been super excited about having you on the show. So it's an honor to have you, Alan. You got your question that you want to start off with?
Of course. Privilege of having the first question.
Yeah,
So, all
feels
right.
good, huh?
All right. Ready to go, Doctor?
Doctor?
Okay. Now, Benedict Arnold. Now, his name is synonymous with traitor. But what were his achievements prior to his appointments in Philadelphia and West Point that made him a national hero? And would the war have been lost without him?
Yeah, I mean, right from the very onset of hostilities in 1775, in spring 1775, Arnold really pushes himself forward to get into the action. He's someone who participates in the capture of Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York, which is really important because Ticonderoga had been a hugely significant fortress during the previous war, the French and Indian War, and also very significantly for the cause of Congress. It was the first offensive of the war, and they actually captured a British institution, and also the fort was full of artillery, which was something which the Patriots were very short of, and those guns were eventually brought back and used to besiege the British garrison at Boston and actually force that garrison out. So right from the start, he was involved in significant operations. And before the end of 1775, Arnold, who at this stage is just a colonel, is appointed to command an expedition against Quebec, which actually goes through the wilderness of what is now Maine. So very rugged terrain, more than 250 miles of very punishing going. Then you have to cross the St. Lawrence, and then you actually have to attack the British garrison of Quebec. So despite the problems posed by the actual terrain, the weather, desertion of elements of his troops, he got the bulk of his command to the objective and united there with other forces under General Montgomery and participated in the assault on Quebec City on the last day of 1775, in which Montgomery was killed and Arnold was wounded in the left leg. So this was an operation which even at the time, people thought, God, this is a pretty remarkable achievement. And it kind of laid the foundation for Arnold's reputation. Amongst those who were very impressed was George Washington, the commander of the Continental Army. And he immediately identified Arnold as the kind of officer he really wanted. If you've got an army which is basically composed of amateurs, you need people who are natural leaders, who've got that kind of instinctive military ability. And Arnold, as he demonstrated on 31st of December 1775, was also extremely brave, which was very important in any military situation, but especially important in the 18th century when this whole question of honor and reputation, conspicuous courage was extremely important. So Arnold laid the foundations of his reputation, and in 1776 he was appointed basically as Commodore of the Patriot fleet on Lake Champlain. And this stage of the war, the British were contemplating an invasion from Canada. they were already going to be attacking the New York area. And Arnold was instrumental in basically putting together a fleet from scratch. We had a few very small vessels, but he had to build an awful lot more, which meant that the British actually had to stop the momentum of their advance, build a fleet of their own capable of gaining the supremacy on the lake. Now, Arnold's fleet was defeated at the Battle of Valcour Island, but the mere fact that he'd actually forced the British to stop and build a fleet of their own gained crucial time. And it's important to remember that at this very same time, another British army under William Howe basically had defeated George Washington on Staten Island, pushed him off of Manhattan, and Washington was retreating back through New Jersey. So the British plan basically was to advance south from Canada, and then these two armies would join up and eliminate what was ever was caught in the vice in between. But of course, because of Arnold's action, that northern wing of the British plan didn't materialize. And we know what happened after that, of course. Washington, despite being pushed across the Delaware, subsequently staged this remarkable winter Christmas campaign where he came back, captured the Hessians at Trenton, defeated a British brigade at Princeton, basically saved the revolution when it seemed like when it was on its last legs. Then Arnold in 1777, he is instrumental in helping to rebuff a British raid on his native state of Connecticut, and he distinguished himself at the Battle of Ridgefield. And then on the basis of this kind of performance, he is promoted to the rank of Major General. And so he takes a conspicuous role in the Saratoga campaign of that summer and autumn. This is basically when the British invasion that had been halted the previous year from Canada restarted. Arnold plays quite a controversial role in that campaign, but there's no doubting that it was his kind of dynamic battlefield leadership, which was in striking contrast to the more cautious approach of the overall commander, Horatio Gates, that was instrumental in halting Sir John Burgoyne and ultimately bringing about the capitulation of Burgoyne's army at Saratoga. And of course, this was extremely important because this was a major defeat which influenced the French, who'd previously been supplying muskets, gunpowder, cash, other supplies. But now the French thought, well, maybe we should actually get boots on the ground and ships on the seas and really come into this war as an ally. And I think most historians would suggest or agree, I think, that this was the pivotal moment where the whole nature of the war was changed from a colonial rebellion to a world war, which meant that Britain's resources were stretched far more than they had been before. And who is responsible for this? I think you could make a very strong case that Arnold himself was a pivotal figure in bringing about this situation.
So you mentioned how Benedict Arnold, really pushed forward. Obviously, very brave. He did all of these things. We have this at the beginning. Now we look at him at the end, and as Alan said in his initial question, his name is sort of synonymous with traitor. So we question, even to an extent, the beginning of who he was. And so that leads to my question. There's many instances, and you mentioned sacrifices his own health, fame, fortune for his men and his country. But did he really believe in the cause of liberty and independence, or was he just seeking more autonomy and rights for his countrymen rather than independence? Or was he an anti-hero who was simply in it for fame and glory?
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question because, it touches on this whole issue of Arnold's kind of motivation, mean, people often say, well, you know, given he was this great kind of warrior, patriot warrior, why then did he kind of throw all that away and go over to the dark side, if you want to look at it in that way? I think what's interesting is that Arnold, even after long after, in fact, he'd gone over to the British in 1784, he said that when he was trying to get money out of what they called the Loyalist Claims Commission, which was basically a fund for people who'd supported the British and lost out as a result of that, he basically said that at the beginning of the war, he was happy to say he had been an out and out patriot. He thought that the cause was just. He thought that it was Americans, of which he always considered himself to be an American, were within their rights and were justified in rebelling against what he considered to be the unfair, tyrannical taxation policies of Britain. So from the outset, going back to 1775, he thought, yeah, this is a justified war. These are genuine grievances that I want to see redressed. Now, with Arnold's narrative arc, if you want to call it that, the question is, well, when does he feel that those grievances have been redressed? And it's at that point that you kind of see a change in his motivation. I'll talk about that in a little while, but I just wanted to go back to this business of you know, was he an anti-hero? Did he sort of set out in some way to put that side of his character out there, or did he even have that side of a character? I think the thing with Arnold was that he kind of always considered himself to be right. There's a phrase which comes up again and again in his correspondence, which is conscious of the rectitude of my intentions. So basically, he's saying, well, yeah, you know, I consider myself to be right here. I consider myself to be justified in whatever I do. I do it for the right reasons. So Arnold, I don't think he kind of was someone who was deliberately setting out to portray himself in a darker way as a sort of an anti-hero. I think he was someone who genuinely did what he thought was right. The whole question, of course, is whether other people agree with whether he was right to do the things he did. And of course, he was involved in a cause, or he became involved in a cause, which ultimately lost. And as we know, history is kind of overwhelmingly written by the winners. But if we kind of look at the question of why Arnold did what he did, I mentioned before that he talked about kind of this idea of he originally joined the struggle because he wanted to overturn what he considered to be Britain's unfair treatment of her American colonies. But he later maintained that, or I should say others also quote Arnold as saying that he fought for the patriot cause as long as he considered that cause to be right. When he no longer considered to be right, that was when he changed sides. So the whole question really that begs is, when did Arnold consider that the cause he had originally signed up for had gone off the rails? Why did he then decide to take a different tack? And I'd argue you can kind of, it's almost like a cumulative thing. You see it building up from relatively small things to start off with, like this whole question of people quibbling over, did he try and sell off loot taken at the capture of Montreal? Did he somehow fiddle his accounts when he was in Canada? It makes you wonder quite how much time he would have had to do that, considering how much else he had on his plate at the time. but this is one of the criticisms that was leveled at him. Then there's the whole question of why isn't he promoted as quickly as he feels he should be? And when he is finally promoted to Major General, he still remains junior to people he sees as less deserving, because the date of his commission isn't backdated. It's other people have gone in the line ahead of him. So what you see is a build-up of grievances. So by the time we get to Saratoga, the autumn of 1777, Arnold has already kind of got, there's a sort of a group of several people who've just are rubbing him up the wrong way. And he's already now got a fairly negative view of Congress, in the sense that these civilians got no idea what soldiering actually means. They've not been out and faced a redcoat or a Hessian. And these are the guys who are basically denying me my promotion. And he was going to put in his resignation, but it was only the kind of the alert of Burgoyne's invasion from Canada that made him think, well, no, actually, I'll go into the field and serve my country. So at that point, he's still the devoted patriot. Then Arnold at Saratoga receives another wound in his left leg. This time it's far more serious. He effectively is crippled from that point onwards. It means he can't have an active field command, not at least for the foreseeable future. So this is when Washington decides he'll do this guy a favor and give him the role of military commandant of Philadelphia in the summer of 1778, just after it's been evacuated by the British. And as I stated elsewhere, basically what Washington did, although he didn't mean to do it, was he handed Arnold a poisoned chalice, because this was the worst possible assignment for someone of Arnold's temperament, because Philadelphia was, you know, a hotbed of the most radical patriots who were kind of at loggerheads with Congress themselves. Now, here was this guy who came in, who was like a military hero. Well, that didn't really mean an awful lot to them. They were suspicious of the military and what the military potentially could represent. They saw soldiers as these guys who were ambitious. All they cared about was their glory and their prestige and their promotion. And Arnold had quite a sort of a lavish lifestyle as well. He liked his creature comforts. He set himself up in one of the fanciest houses in Philadelphia, in fact, that had previously been used by Britain's General Howe as his headquarters. He was seen as someone who was far too friendly with people who were still seen as having loyalist sympathies. And basically, before too long, he was in a kind of a clash of personalities with Joseph Reed, who was the head of the Supreme Executive Council in Philadelphia. And he was just making enemies by the day, people who just basically thought he was arrogant, just didn't really feel that he represented their cause, whilst Arnold saw them as people who thought, well, hang on, you know, I've been out there fighting, and this is what we get. We get these people who I've got nothing in common with. They don't even, this doesn't even seem to be the same cause I signed up for in 1775. So it's really from the summer of 1778 to May 1779, when Arnold first approaches the British. Really, that's the kind of turning point. Within over a period of months, not immediately, but gradually, you have a situation where Arnold gets more and more exasperated, and he's begging George Washington to put him on trial so he can clear his name from all the charges that have been assembled by Joseph Reed, mostly very minor things. But Arnold is someone who cares very much about his personal reputation, and he starts to get more and more obsessed with this idea that people have got a vendetta against him, this unfair kind of poisonous campaign to try and tarnish his good name. And that's something which pushes him towards the British, But what I've tried to argue is that by that stage in the war, if we go back to this whole question of redress of grievances, by that stage of the war, the French had come into the war, or were just about to come in actively. So the British, at the last minute, launched what kind of a peace commission or a negotiating commission, the Carlisle Commission, to try and basically say, look, we'll give you back everything you had before we imposed all that taxation. We'll give you everything short of independence if you just, come to the negotiating table. But of course, by that stage, it was too late. And this is when Arnold later maintains that the Carlisle Commission, as it was known, actually offered everything he'd been fighting for. And it was at that stage he, from the evidence I found, basically decided that the only way to end the war was to kind of inflict some kind of decisive blow, which would mean that what he now saw as a dysfunctional Congress would be deposed, and things would go back to the situation in 1763, before Britain started to impose the policies that antagonized people like Arnold in the first place.
All right, so now looking at the events between Burgoyne's surrender in October of 77 and his Benedict Arnold's defection in September of 1780, these are some of the events, and I know you mentioned a couple of them. France, who was America's traditional enemy, joins the war as America's ally. And from my understanding, he didn't care too much for France, but it's ironic that it was because of him that they came on board. Now, Spain, which controlled North America west of the Mississippi, declared war the following year and began seizing British West Florida for itself. You also have Britain launching the Southern Campaign, which involved capturing Savannah and Charlestown. And then you had the lopsided victories for the British at, I want to call it Waxhaws, but I could never get the name right. But Camden was one of them, and Camden effectively ended Horatio Gates's career right there.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So now when Gates, of course, fled, there was no Continental Army in South Carolina or Georgia. So, Cornwallis, who was in charge at that time, this is before, by the way, for some of our audience, this is before Nathaniel Greene was appointed head of the Southern Department, and this was also before Kings Mountain, which really changed things, or the Battle of Kings Mountain. So in Arnold's mind, he's looking at Lord Cornwallis, who's pretty much unstoppable, moving to North Carolina. Now you throw in a wrecked economy, the worthless continental dollars, mutiny over pay, war fatigue, his loyalist wife Peggy, the Conway cabal, which showed him that there were other generals that were kind of disaffected by Washington, and then what you mentioned, the Carlisle Commission, which Arnold fully supported. And then you had Joseph Reed threatening to pull Pennsylvania out of the war if Arnold went unpunished, which forced Washington to reluctantly rebuke Benedict Arnold. Then you had Congress concluding that Arnold failed to account for much of the money that was allocated for the Quebec expedition, and they demanded reimbursement. So throw all this in. Your opinion on this one is, what impact did all these events have in his mind? Was all that more of a deciding factor which caused him to turn, or was it his financial situation and ill treatment that he received at the hands of not only his accusers, but by Congress? Or was it all a perfect storm? I know that was a long-winded question, but I wanted to throw all that in.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the sort of the question of Arnold's finances, I mentioned earlier on that he was someone who, enjoyed a lavish lifestyle before the war started. He, as a result of his business, basically as a sort of a merchant sea captain, he'd accumulated the lifestyle of a gentleman. That's what he aspired to. And his home in New Haven was like the fanciest mansion in town. And we know that when he, before he married Peggy Shippen, Peggy Arnold, he'd taken out on a lease on a very large property in Philadelphia. We know that he drove around Philadelphia in a carriage, and he had liveried servants, which was something which seen as kind of very ostentatious. So, he had a lavish lifestyle to fund. But this whole question of, was he so badly in debt? Was he so much in need of money that money, as one of his critics said, money was his god? Was his treason about getting a payoff from the British? I think it's very significant that when he first approached the British in May of 1779, money, some kind of cash down payment, isn't even raised. He does mention the question of effectively kind of compensation for any losses he might suffer. Of course, if you go over to the other side, all your property is going to be confiscated. What's going to happen to your home in Philadelphia, what's going to happen to your home in New Haven. That's one issue. But, when Arnold's treason came to light, it was very tempting for people to say, oh, yeah, he's been bought by British gold, just like Judas. He's the American Judas. It's a very powerful image. But when I look at it, I think it's far more a combination of those factors. You mentioned the perfect storm. I'd say it very much is a perfect storm, but it's a storm that takes a while to build. It's a coming storm, and then you end up with this great kind of cataclysmic thunderstorm, if you like, where everything kicks off pretty much at the same time. And it's when he's in Philadelphia where you have him being brought up on, accused of various things, demanding a court-martial. He marries a woman who is known to come from a family with loyalist tendencies. Now, there's no evidence, I have to say, that Peggy Shippen, who was only 18 at the time, somehow pushed her husband into treason. But we don't know whether she certainly got involved with the treason once the decision was made to go over to the British. So it wasn't something she felt uncomfortable with, put it that way. So you have a combination of factors, and I think that money wasn't really the decisive factor, although Arnold was a businessman. He did aspire to a certain lifestyle, and if he basically was instrumental in helping King George III to retain his North American colonies, he didn't see why he shouldn't be compensated for that, both in terms of perhaps, being given some recognition in terms of a title, and also being paid an amount of money that would compensate him for not only what he had done, but for what he had lost. I'm not sure if that really answers your question,
No, I think it
but
does.
No, it
Yeah,
does.
that does. I mean, the perfect storm. And that's sort of what you and I discussed. Like, all of those things just piled on. He was, at the end of the day, he was still human. And you can only put up with so much until start, either you get the opportunity to fight back, which Joseph Reed didn't allow, more or less. And then it's, if you don't get that chance, you go the other way.
Yeah. Well, what was it? What was it about him? I have a list of people who went after him. You had now Ethan Allen slighted him. You had John Brown, James Easton. You had Gates, James Ferguson, Joseph Reed, and the Second Continental Congress. What seemed almost like they were intentionally skipping him over. But what was it about Arnold that they targeted him so much? Because I know Adams was worried about a cult of personality for Washington and Arnold, but what was it about him that led even Philip Schuyler and Washington both to recognize they're really going after this guy? I mean, was there any truth to Brown's accusations and Reed's accusations, or?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Brown in particular, went after Arnold almost like an obsession. And even though he gets kicked back at various times where committees decide there's nothing in his allegations, he keeps coming back. And year after year, he's making allegations. And you have to wonder, is this about Arnold or is it about Brown? Who is the one with the personality problem? The same with Easton, and certainly with Joseph Reed. Joseph Reed almost comes round to being kind of shamefaced about the way he went after Arnold. Of course, this is before Arnold's treason comes to light. So I think you can almost turn this around and say, well, is it a question of Arnold's personality, or is it just a question of how Arnold's particular personality or his particular way of behaving, which, as you say, actually drew the admiration of well-regarded figures, of course, venerated figures like George Washington, well-regarded people like Philip Schuyler. Is it more about Arnold, or is it about the nature of his critics? I don't think many people now would go out and rave too much about Horatio Gates, really. So I think that Arnold's critics, his most vociferous critics, had quite a lot in common, in the sense that they were people who kind of in some ways had I've Arnold obviously did rub them up the wrong way, but is it because he had qualities that they lacked? Was there an element of jealousy there?
Well, speaking of like the personality conflicts, now you've written books on George Washington and Robert Rogers. How were their relationships with Benedict Arnold? And I know that this is a question that Alan has been dying to ask because he's got friends along with himself who are huge fans of the show. I'm a pretty big fan of the show too. I mean, I watched it for a good while. But the TV show Turn Washington Spies.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched that? And if you did, do you think it's an accurate portrayal of these three, Benedict Arnold, George Washington, and Robert Rogers, and as well as John Graves Simcoe, and the way that they interacted with each other? Was it pretty accurate, or not at all, or was it just like, well, that's Hollywood going nuts?
Well, yeah, I did see certainly the first two seasons of Turn, and then after that, I live in Amsterdam, so it wasn't quite as easy for me to catch it as perhaps elsewhere. But I've seen sporadic subsequent episodes. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Turn is a kind of dramatization based in inverted commas upon historical events. So you've got certain personalities. Robert Rogers, for example. I mean, I wrote about Rogers when he was in his prime back in the 1750s during the French and Indian War. He was a great hero. In fact, he was more of a hero at that time than George Washington was. But by the time of the events depicted in Turn, Rogers was pretty much a sort of a washed up has been. He was a shadow of his former self. He'd had a very hard time. He'd been in debt. He had a real drinking problem, and the way he was depicted in Turn, I think, tried to reflect the fact that by that stage he was a bit of a rogue, but he was definitely in there as a sort of a character actor, as a kind of the bad guy, an interesting bad guy, and a great character. Interesting, the relationship. I mean, I don't think that Rogers ever met Washington, to my knowledge, in real life. They had, I mean, Washington knew who Rogers was, because Rogers was still a huge celebrity because of his exploits in the French and Indian War. And I don't think Rogers met Benedict Arnold. Interestingly enough, John Graves Simcoe, who in turn is again portrayed as a real kind of baddie, in real life, the real John Graves Simcoe was in fact seen by many as like the kind of the perfect gentleman, and also a kind of a very, very effective leader of a sort of a semi-regular force. And it's interesting that the real life Simcoe, as depicted in Turn, inherited or took over Rogers's old outfit, the Queen's Rangers, and he actually transformed it into a kind of a crack light infantry and light cavalry type formation. In fact, one of the best loyalist outfits in the British Army. So the portrayal of Simcoe, which I thought was great, very good entertainment. Unfortunately, nothing like the real Simcoe, but that's TV. The relationship between Washington and Arnold, I think from the episodes I saw, that Turn made it very clear that Washington was a bit of an Arnold fanboy, if you like, and was very impressed. Well, of course, until September 25th, 1780. And he was impressed because here's a guy who gets stuff done. And so I think really Turn, it's entertainment, but it's entertainment where there was an intelligent effort made to try and show the reality of the Revolutionary War, in the sense it wasn't just about redcoats fighting good guys in blue coats. There were also loyalists, there were divided loyalties. It wasn't just, not every guy wearing a red coat was really, really bad. It wasn't like the Patriot, for example. So I think it was far more, well, that's a different story, of course, but it's far more nuanced. And so there's a lot more for viewers to get their teeth into in terms of the characters. But certain characters, I think people like Rogers and Simcoe were very much cast in the role of the kind of the less sympathetic villains of the piece, whereas people like John Andre, was seen as a far more sympathetic, likable character. And yet, of course, in real life, from what we can gather, Andre was someone who even his enemies, found him an attractive personality who they liked. And when he was executed, they ended up crying as if he'd been their friend. And well, by that stage, he had become their friend. So I think, Turn did a good job of teasing out the drama of that whole kind of spy network situation.
Yeah, I know that Hamilton, it strained relations between Hamilton and Washington,
Yeah.
but that question was one of the reasons, is my friend Marlene Devia, who's going to be watching. She runs the Turn page, and I told her we're going to ask him about the TV show.
Ask.
So
You got to be a man of your word.
that's
man.
right, and I promised her, and feel better, Marlene.
I hope she
All
isn't
right,
disappointed.
What's that?
I don't think
I
she
hope
will
she
be.
isn't too disappointed.
No, she'll
Maybe
love
I
the
should have
fact.
attached a little white plait like Major Andre in the series. Apparently that was his trademark. Not sure whether he wore one in real life, of course, but then again, it's, as you say, it's TV, isn't it?
Right,
Yeah.
it is. Well,
I was thinking about doing the same thing. Yeah, but I decided against.
I think the girls on the show, or who watch the show, are in love with John Andre, so they're kind of upset.
I
about
think
that.
I'm
Oh,
in love
okay.
with
All right.
John.
Well, I won't say anything against him then.
All right. All right, so now, Benedict Arnold, great national hero. In my opinion, I think he was the greatest tactician we had in the war. We mentioned his events, what he did in New York, saved New England, got France and Spain involved in the Netherlands, which turned it into a world war, which led to the evacuation of, or the redeployment of British personnel, to fight in other theaters elsewhere. Do you think that Arnold could ever, or should he be forgiven for what he did? Was his heart? We mentioned that his heart was in the right place. He was disillusioned with the revolution, pushed too far by its leaders, and believed the time had come for reconciliation under the terms of the Carlisle Commission. Or is his betrayal at West Point and his attacks and defection his attacks on Connecticut, his attacks on Virginia. Will that rule it out, especially coming from a guy who was so high up the military chain? Do you think he's going to be forgiven? Do you think there'll be a, you know, a there was a word and I
Look, man,
can't.
he's going to be a Pete Rose, okay? He's going to be a Pete Rose. He's never getting into the hall.
Well, I'm not suggesting he gets
No
into
matter
the
how
hall,
great he
but I mean,
was.
will people be like, you know what? Let's, there's a statue of his boot in Saratoga. Are they going to put a statue for the man who won the battle? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think that boot monument sums up the whole situation very well, because it acknowledges the fact that this was the Continental Army's most brilliant general, I think is the wording, but it doesn't say who he was. But of course, everyone knows it's Arnold because it's his double wounded left leg. So it acknowledges his contribution, but at the same time, it makes it clear that, yeah, he's had to be effaced from the roll of honor of the Revolutionary War generals because of his treason. And I suppose, yeah, whichever way you look at it, whether Arnold really was genuine in his motivation, and I believe he was, however wrong it might sound, he believed he was right, and he acted from what he believed to be valid, justified reasons. But what I would certainly think, well, there were plenty of other people in the Continental Army, from ordinary soldiers to senior generals, who were just as miffed as Arnold was with the fact they hadn't been paid for months. They'd hardly had anything to eat. The cause was at low ebb, but they didn't defect to the British. So I would argue that Arnold felt strong ideological grounds for doing what he did, but I think it's very hard to forgive him for doing that when other people, not of his rank anyway. I mean, there were plenty of guys who deserted to the British because they were hungry and wanted to go home. But I think it's significant that Arnold, the reason his treason caused such a shock was the fact he was a senior officer. Not only that, he was the most celebrated fighting general, apart from Washington himself, that the Patriots had. And so I think it's very difficult. It would be very difficult. I would find it very hard to believe that Arnold would ever be seen as someone who would be totally forgiven and to have some kind of redemption, even though without Arnold, the Revolutionary War wouldn't have ended the way it did. It's I think it's an intriguing situation. You have to balance the two out. So does his contribution acquit him of his subsequent defection? I think there'll always be people who say, well, if you betray your comrades, which is what he did. I mean, it was the way it was done, of course, up until the day the treason was disclosed. Washington didn't have the foggiest idea that Arnold had gone over to the British. And it's interesting because despite everything you hear about the Culper spy ring having sniffed out Arnold, they had no idea at all. Benjamin Talmadge, who was the handler of the Culper spy ring, just days before Arnold's defection, he was, writing letters to Arnold, thanking him for making sure that his troop of dragoons was well mounted. He was someone who really admired Arnold. So I think it's perhaps the betrayal of people like Talmadge and Washington, who really did believe in Arnold, that makes his treason extremely difficult to excuse. And of course, in my own book, what I tried to do was basically explain why he did what he did, what his motivation was. But that ultimately does not mean that what he did was right in a broader sense. I think it means that what he did was right in his own terms. So I don't think really we're going to see. I mean, the 250th anniversary of Arnold's treason, along with a lot of other events, will be coming up fairly soon. Be interesting to see how people look at things then. But I don't think he's going to get a whole body added to that disembodied leg at Saratoga anytime soon.
Yeah, it's as time has gone by, centuries has gone by, he almost is in the same place he wound up at the end of his military career, almost a man without a country, because he moves to England, but he's not really welcome there. He sure isn't welcome here, and now it's like I don't know how people feel about him in the UK or in England in particular, but I know how people feel about him here, and it's almost like even now. He has no place to stay, even in history, if that makes sense.
Yeah, even the Canadians didn't want him.
Yeah, so it's the tragic. He's the tragic figure, right?
Yeah,
And it's a very intriguing. It's a moral play, is really what it comes down to. And you were saying, there were plenty of people who were miffed, just as miffed. As Benedict Arnold, and yet they didn't betray him. One of those people would be, George Washington. You had the Conway Cabal. You had people in Congress like talking bad about him, even as, John Adams was like, this guy is not, get this guy out of here, And, they just undermined him constantly. And then they were going to try to get up into Canada without even letting him know. It was just, and yet, you see the difference, the parallel between the two, or the comparison, the contrast between a Benedict Arnold and a George Washington. And it's like you said, putting him in Philadelphia was the worst place for his particular temperament. And you put somebody else in there like a George Washington, and you would probably have a very different outcome. And it comes down to temperament.
Yeah, she's our Yoko Ono.
Yeah, I think basically with Arnold, if it doesn't sound too much of a obvious point, character is all. His specific character, where he was someone who, really did believe that, okay, what I say goes. If I come to a decision, that's the right decision for a reason. And he was very, very sensitive about his reputation. I mean, he fought duels before the Continental. He joined the Continental Army. He fought duels in defense of his reputation after he moved to England. 12 years after his treason, he fought a duel against someone, a lord, who said, that he'd defected for reasons that were dishonorable. So why is this guy, who's so dishonorable? If this is what intrigues me. He obviously thinks that he hasn't done anything wrong. Well, why would you fight a duel otherwise for a war that ended, a decade earlier and no one's even talking about anymore? I find it intriguing, but until someone one day, opens up an old trunk in an attic somewhere and finds Arnold's personal journal, which who knows, maybe that will happen if he ever wrote one, of course. There maybe is something out there that will shed new light on his personality, on his motivation. I mean, if you can find the skeleton of an English king under a car park or parking lot after God knows how many years, as they did with Richard III, then it's not beyond the realms of possibility that some new documentation might appear which clears up a lot of things. I can only hope.
Well, speaking of intriguing, this has been an intriguing conversation. I mean, this is a long time coming, getting sort of burying, or maybe not burying, but just, explaining and clarifying some things about the great but not good man, Benedict Arnold. So thank you so much, Stephen, for being on the Sons of History. This is great. This is fantastic. So.
Yeah, I'll say if anyone is going to, or if anything is going to lead the way to have people reevaluate him, I think it's going to be this book. And based on, I've seen praise from Francis, I want to say Cogliano, Edward Langle, Mark Edward Lender, and I think he was the one who co-wrote that book that about Fatal Sunday.
Okay.
And then you got the great Gordon Wood. All praised your book, so
yeah,
to have those kind of endorsements for this work. And by the way, I'm also going to read your book, The White Devil, on Robert Rogers and his raid. That was a very big I'm a big fan of that story.
It's not
So-
about Ace Ventura. It's about Robert Rogers. Yeah.
It's about Robert Rogers. They went on a raid, and then coming back, they came after him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
not a good.
that's a very different story. But thank you very much for the kind words. And I have to say, it was a real pleasure talking to you both, and to have the opportunity to answer, such thoughtful questions. Hopefully, we managed to kind of shed a bit more light on Arnold's character. But I think he's always going to remain an enigma, really, in many respects.
Yeah, I mean, well, Judas Iscariot has been it's been 2,000 years, and I don't see him getting any praise anytime soon. So, although he does have, I think, in some of the lost works, he's got a book, the Book of Judas, somewhere.
Okay.
It's
Okay, kill him.
what?
All right. Well.
Hey, I felt bad for him too. Like
Oh, you did?
what he did.
Yeah.
What he did was wrong. But I think Judas's heart was in the right place.
Jesus said it, summed it up pretty well. You shouldn't have been born. So, well, Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show. We greatly appreciate it. We'll chat with you later, man.
Thank you very much, and it's been a real pleasure.
Well, man, I really enjoyed that conversation. What did you think?
It was a lot of fun, very enlightening. I've been, Benedict Arnold has always been one of my favorite subjects. Kind of like a Greek, tragedy.
Yeah.
Just about. So.
Well,
Very true.
talking of tragedies, Guy, there was a slight minor tragedy in the recording. I think, you said his great enemies included James Ferguson. Who's this James Ferguson guy? I think you meant James Wilkinson, didn't you? Wilkie, as he was known, the infamous Wilkie, who was one of these guys who just had a vendetta and kept on about Arnold long after Arnold committed treason. And it turns out, ironically, that Wilkie was a treasonous guy as bad as Arnold, except his treason was with Spain. I'm just really surprised you didn't pick up on that. But anyway, there we go.
You told me that
I thought the recording was over.
terminated our conversation with him. Thank you. Hello, Doctor. Well, yes, actually, I'm glad you pointed that out. Yes, James Ferguson was killed in Kings Mountain. I don't know why that popped in my head when I said that, but yes, James Wilkinson, who seemed a shady character to begin with, and
This feels good to see you get roasted.
We all make mistakes. Homer also nodded, as they say.
That's right.
Yes,
We
yes.
all make mistakes. Benedict Arnold, James Wilkinson, Alan Joaquin. Pretty much the same.
But
trilogy.
Good company.
hopefully I'll be forgiven for this one. But although he's not going to be forgiven for continuing the recording of, because you told me that we.
I thought it
ended
was
the
over. Hey, I'm just as surprised as you are. There he is.
Well, I must say it's a pleasure talking to you again. I can't wait for your next.
Yeah, no,
I
it
mean, I
is, certainly.
can't wait till I start reading White Devil. I think that'd be a.
Yeah, speaking of.
Speaking of,
Certainly something to chew on. And you'll find out what I mean by that when you get to chapter 6 or whatever it is. It deals with their retreat through the wilderness.
all right, I will.
Speaking of retreating, I'm going to have to officially bring this to a retreat. You win, you lose. I get to sit on the sidelines and watch.
Yeah, but you're
It's
gonna
beautiful.
pay.
That was wild. I apologize. Didn't know it was still recording, but I think we're alone now.
I think you're gonna pay for this because you're a traitor. That was
That's true.
treason to do that.
That was treason, but I had to lock you up there for a second.
But he's a good sport, I must
Oh,
say.
yeah. That was fantastic.
Yeah. So
It's good stuff. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you enjoyed that interview. I know we both did. Before you go, obviously, our book and movie recommendations.
Well, I think it's going to be unanimous that the book that we are recommending is Turncoat. It is a fantastic read. A lot of people are sitting saying, like, this guy right here says, the defining portrait of Arnold for the 21st century. Francis Cogliano is apparently a big deal. Gordon Wood,
Gordon Wood,
those are just some
living legend.
Yeah.
So-
I recommend this. It's a fantastic book. I liked it so much. It's a good read. David McCullough, similarities in the speed of which I'm able to read his book. It's not boring. It's not dry. I enjoyed it as much as David McCullough's book. Even Alex Kershaw. Alex Kershaw.
Oh, yeah.
So
Good stuff.
different writing styles, but the way I enjoy reading it. So now for my movie,
I
although
think this one's pretty predictable.
yeah, well, this isn't going to necessarily be a movie, but this is more of. Here, can you help me hold these up? Because I've got. See, this is what sucks is that it's 4 seasons, but one of them's blue. They put out only 3 seasons. You got to watch the 4th one online, but they put 1 on Blu-ray and 2 on DVD. But the TV show Turn, Washington Spies.
It's a good one.
I like it. They, did a few things that I was like, that didn't happen. But I mean, you've got all these people in the TV show. You have Benedict Arnold, Peggy Shippen, John Andre, John Graves Simcoe, Robert Rogers, Benjamin Talmadge, and the Culper Ring, which is really what this is about.
Yep.
And then you got George Washington himself.
Yeah.
So
Who I think the guy who plays him plays a very good part.
Yeah.
So my movie recommendation is one I saw just the other night, Death on the Nile. It is the new Agatha Christie follow-up from Murder on the Orient Express. Went and watched that.
Is that the one with Wonder Woman in it?
Yeah.
Now, is she the reporter or the?
No. She's not a reporter.
Is she there to save everyone with her?
No, she is there. To with her lasso and then the thing. No, it was actually it was good. It was a good show, good movie. So if you're not busy and you're looking for a good movie, I'd go check that one out. It's pretty cool. Kenneth Branagh, he always does fantastic. He does a lot of the Shakespeare stuff as well.
Yeah.
So good things.
Henry V.
Henry V.
Yeah.
That's right. Saint Crispin's Day. Yeah, he does a fantastic job. Just been doing it forever. And if you've never seen Hamlet, his rendition of it, it's stunning.
Better
It's
than Mel Gibson?
incredible. Yeah.
Or is it?
Yeah.
He was in that movie that you recommended the other day, Valkyrie.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Yeah. He's good stuff. He was also he's in a bunch of stuff. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's our book and movie recommendations. Alan, we only got like 30 seconds. Go. Where can people find us?
Facebook, Twitter. No, not Twitter. Instagram, YouTube. Like us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Now subscribe on YouTube.
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay.
Go.
Facebook, Instagram, Getter, YouTube.
And we have our own website,
website.
www.thesonsofhistory.com, and we're also going to be on Rumble pretty soon. Go.
And we're already on Rumble. You have no idea what's going on in our show, do you? What is it that you do here? Nothing!
9!
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We'll see you later. Have a great week.